From its beginnings on the NES, Final Fantasy as a series has made its main objective to be to constantly reinvent itself. Though the core of each game tends to be pretty similar, and there are consistent elements, there's always some change to the gameplay or format that significantly alters the overall experience between each entry. These ideas are, for better or for worse, usually scrapped and replaced in the next title for yet another new system. This leads to some entries being quite divisive, as what worked for some people in one title may not work for others, nor is it representative of the rest of the franchise. Final Fantasy VIII is one of those entries. For some people, this is the pinnacle of the series and one of, if not the best JRPGs of all time. For others, this game is a messy, annoying, and tedious waste of time. I am one of those people. For this game, I played the remastered version on PC, mostly just out of convenience, as it already had convenient things like speed-ups and other game boosts built in. I know some people don't really like this version, but it's the best overall, just for my sake. Gameplay in FF8, at its core, changes very little from what the previous games had established, especially 7. The ATB meter, limit breaks, 3-person parties, character-specific classes, it's all here. By this point, the developers had a working formula, and they kept with it. If you've played any of the previous 4 installments, you already know the basics of what's going on in Final Fantasy VIII. The big addition to this game is the junction system, and it's a little convoluted, so I'll do my best to explain it here in words. The system begins by using summons, which are now called Guardian Forces. Along with being just a big attack or buff like they used to be, they now serve the additional purpose of being equipment. When you equip a summon, you unlock slots on your character that allows you to upgrade and manipulate the corresponding stat or resistances. To use these upgrades, you need to equip magic spell cards to the stats, which are now a replenishable finite resource. Different spells have different stats that they affect in different ways, so there's a ton of variations and builds that can be made for each character. To gather magic cards for equipment, you have to use the new Draw ability either on a draw spot that you can find in the overworld, or in combat on an enemy. This gives a set number of cards from the draw and adds them to your inventory. In some cases, you can also draw new summons from opponents, expanding your available junctions and giving your characters more options to have stats opened up and make them stronger. This may all sound really confusing, and the game recognizes this, as it has some pretty extensive tutorials attempting to explain it, and I'll admit, it took me a while to really understand the junction system the first time I played this, but it makes much more sense once you get your hands on it and you get to start messing around and testing things. Unfortunately, understanding the system doesn't necessarily mean that I liked it. With junctioning being your main method of progression, this means that you'll need magic cards, and a lot of them. The more of a spell card you're carrying, the greater the stat effect when junctioned, and at 100 card capacity for 50 different spells in the game, for each character, and you get on average 1 to 5 cards per draw.
That's almost 100. No, really, that's almost 100.
You're going to be drawing for a large portion of your playtime. I found this extremely boring even while using speed-ups, so I can't even imagine how much I would dislike it on the original PlayStation version at normal speeds. I like my leveling to feel pretty natural. I prefer to minimize the amount of dedicated grinding, and I'd rather progress through actions that I was going to complete anyway. When I play a turn-based game, I'd like to level my characters through any encounters I have as I march through the story and the occasional side quest, and provided I don't skip too many fights, I should be naturally scaling with the game and meeting the requirements for the next harder required sections with minimal additional work. The junction system does not lend itself to this at all. Yes, you still progress through enemy encounters, but now you have to halt in the middle of the battle and spend a ridiculous amount of time per fight every instance there's a new spell to draw or you have a new character. Realistically, you could draw a few cards and move on, but you don't know when that spell will appear again, as every enemy has their own set spells that you can draw from. So it's in your best interest to grab as many as you can while it's available, oftentimes just filling to the top. This is also made worse by the fact that magics are finite. So if you use a spell, you're additionally lowering your own stats, so it's vital that you draw as much as you can, whenever you can. You can use spells straight from a draw without consuming any cards of your own, but that limits your magic options to only what the enemy has available on them. To help mitigate this issue, the game does include a regular experience system like the previous entries. Kill enemies, get experience points, level up, and improve your baseline stats, same as always. The problem with this is that the game scales to your level. As you gain XP and level up, enemies will also level up and become stronger. This scaling isn't one-to-one, however, as it gets progressively more difficult since the enemies scale much faster than you do. At level 5, a party can take on a level 5 enemy fairly easily, but a level 30 party will generally tend to struggle with a level 30 enemy unless they have top level junctions. It also doesn't help that the stat benefits you get from leveling are pretty minuscule, meaning that this system kind of only exists solely to increase difficulty without telling the player. Instead of you getting stronger and meeting the requirements of the game is just getting stronger to punish you for getting stronger. Knowing all this, the player's options become extremely limited despite the seemingly open nature of the junction system. The gameplay loop very quickly becomes find an enemy with a new magic to draw and repeat for as long as possible as you never know when that spell will show up again, and run away because if you attack the enemy and kill them, you'll gain XP leveling up, and you'll only make the game more difficult for yourself later. Now, some people might say that you don't necessarily have to avoid leveling if you don't want to. That's true, you can do whatever you want. If you want to make the game harder, go right ahead. That's all in your power. However, even the game itself incentivizes this playstyle, as nearly every single encounter that you're required to do and kill the opponent rewards the player with no experience points and only AP for upgrading junctions. The game wants you to avoid combat and instead just draw and run on repeat for 50 hours as its dev-intended experience. The only other major point to the gameplay is that, with the exception of the attack and limit breaks, you can customize the commands you have equipped freely. You're limited to 3 choices, but there are a ton of options that you can get from the character's junction to Guardian Force. I like this in theory, but your command options also include things like items, magic, and summoning. Basic functions of a turn-based game and the entire franchise at this point. Meaning you have to give up on one of these if you want to utilize literally any other options. This also includes the draw command, the main mechanic of the game, and as we've established earlier, using the magic command depletes your magic card count and lowers stats, so it's probably best to just drop that, but your 3 slots are still likely to be taken by items, draw, and Guardian Force, leaving really no room for anything else unless you want to drop an extremely significant portion of a character's general moveset. In Final Fantasy VII, if you equipped a command materia, the command was added in addition to your pre-existing moveset. In 8, commands are more of a nuisance than anything, further bringing down the actual level of customization available as you limit the things that you have. Outside of that, there really isn't much going on gameplay-wise in Final Fantasy VIII. Minigames have all but been removed besides the new card game Triple Triad, and there's not much else available to do. Speaking of Triple Triad, I'd be foolish to not mention it at least briefly here, seeing that it's arguably more popular than the base game itself. You and your opponent take turns placing cards on a grid, and they all have 4 numbers on them. If your adjacent number is higher, you take the opponent's card, but they could also take it right back next turn with another card. The player with the most cards at the end wins. While it is entirely optional, it can make for a pretty fun break from the core gameplay, and I see why people like it so much. Unfortunately, I'm not a fan of Triple Triad. I don't necessarily dislike it at all, but it really doesn't do much for me. I do think it's pretty funny how you can challenge pretty much any NPC in the game, regardless of how dire the situation may be in the story. You can just pull out a deck of cards and go to town. It's pretty funny. I'll be entirely frank, I had next to no fun playing this game at all. The systems in place at best feel like a jumbled mess that don't really work together, and at worst, actively go against the main gameplay loop of what makes turn-based games fun for me in the first place. Final Fantasy VIII was a slog for me to play, but I can respect the attempt at keeping tradition and once again trying to come up with a new, innovative system to keep the series fresh. I've played plenty of games that had mediocre to bad gameplay that I still look back on pretty fondly because the story and the writing carried the experience for me. Maybe Final Fantasy VIII is one of those games. I hate the story of Final Fantasy VIII. The game opens with a pretty mysterious cutscene, lots of flashing, cryptic imagery and text interlaced throughout a battle that the protagonist is facing. Clearly to show off the upgraded visuals and model quality from FF7, the characters in the scene here look a lot more realistic and much closer to the box art designs than the previous entry had. The fight ends with the two slashing each other across the face, and the scene cuts to our protagonist waking up in a medical ward, likely having lost the fight. We learn the two's names, Squall and Cypher, and that due to the clear tension and bad blood between them, their combat training for the military academy that they attend had gotten way out of hand. The doctor confirms his health, and a mysterious woman appears in the mirror, excited to see Squall again, though it seems he can't see her. Squall's instructor Kistis comes to pick him up and takes him back to class, though Squall acts really moody and put out the whole way there. You then have to read the tutorial section for the basics of the game, as even the developers know how complicated these new systems are to first-time players, so they want to get you in and acclimated as quickly as possible. Once you're done with your homework, you bump into the new transfer student Selphie and agree to give her a tour of the facility. Now that that's out of the way, you finally continue on your way to the field exam with Kistis, where she then explains the Guardian Force, or GF, and junction systems again, just in case you didn't understand it earlier. Onwards towards your exam, you encounter some random battles, testing the basics of the combat mechanics, and finally get to your destination and test them against Ifrit. After succeeding and a few more tutorials, the duo returns to the school called the Garden, and Squall has to prepare for the second half of his field exam. There's a bit more of the intro section to the game here, but I feel like that's a good enough cutoff point for our purposes for this discussion. This intro is really, really boring to me. I don't mind a slow burn. Some of my favorite games are really slow to start and take forever to get into. But Final Fantasy VIII really does nothing for me here. Look at FF7's intro. It's bombastic, flashy, has a little bit of mystery going on, and it very quickly gets the player acclimated to the controls and the general gameplay on their own terms. In contrast, FF8 takes almost 30 minutes before you even get into a battle, instead opting to make you study for the SAT because the junction system is so needlessly convoluted that it's near impossible to explain through gameplay alone, making these long tutorials a necessary evil. Even going beyond this segment, you don't really learn anything about the characters or the world in the intro, other than that Squall is moody and hates talking to people. You don't learn about the military academy really, or how it works, you just kind of are there. I was willing to give the game the benefit of the doubt at this point, kind of hoping it would pick up later and, the story would improve, but it never really does. Squall and his band of dunderheads pass their exam and become seeds, while Cypher fails and is removed from the plot for a while. At their inauguration party, Squall meets the conventional Japanese beauty standard woman who clearly likes him despite his terrible attitude and is only there for a self-insert scene, as they have a little dance. And then there's this really weird moment where Kistis flirts with him and it's never really relevant again or really brought up at all. I will give the game credit that within just a few hours of starting, they've introduced most of the main players in the story at this point. And I don't know enough about them to really care that much, but it's nice that they're brought in that early. I've played a lot of pretty bad games over the years, and I think I'm more willing than most people to overlook the faults of a game if there's other stuff that can carry the experience and kind of give it that little bit of charm. but unfortunately, FF8's plot has too many offending moments that just spoil everything for me. So many moments, in fact, that I can't reasonably go over just about everything without this video being 5 hours long, like every other terrible YouTube essayist who can't consolidate their thoughts whatsoever. So I'm gonna do like a quick rapid fire segment on things that suck or I hated about the story of Final Fantasy VIII. And here's your spoiler warning if you care, but honestly, I wouldn't recommend playing this game anyway. The story's bad, so, here you go. The concept of the military school is pretty cool. I think it's a really interesting setting that you could do a lot with, but unfortunately the game almost never utilizes this setting in any meaningful way whatsoever. And the plot just kind of generally makes no sense and things just kind of happen as a whole. Squall does nothing the entire game. Stuff just kind of gets forced onto him and it gets really, really annoying. There's barely any moments in the game where Squall wants to do something and pushes the plot forward with his actions. It's always he's following the actions of the plot and is just there. Squall and the aforementioned Japanese beauty standard woman Rinoa have a terrible love story and it makes no sense, nor does it really ever be believable that it would happen. Squall spends the vast majority of the game being forced to like Rinoa by the rest of the cast, as they keep pushing them together and talking about how cute they are as a couple. And Squall resents it. He gets legitimately angry at the party on multiple occasions because of this. Until the end of the game where, for some reason, he just completely flips that on its head, and the only motivation he has is Rinoa. He doesn't care about anything else. There's not really a scene or a moment where, they bond or come to some realization. He just kind of likes her now because the plot says he does. Nothing actually builds their relationship. Junctions causing memory loss for every main party member is one of the worst and stupidest plot devices I've ever seen in a game. It doesn't even matter in the grand scheme of things because you can take it out and the plot doesn't change at all. It's simply there just to have like a cool, whoa, shock moment for the player, but it's really not interesting and it just comes off as contrived. The main cast for this game just kind of sucks. I don't like them at all. Having 6 required characters means that, for the most part in any story segment, every character is involved in some way, shape, or form. This is a nice change from the previous games, where optional characters often ended up being left behind during narrative segments. Unfortunately, just because they're there and talking doesn't mean that they're integrated well. The game is constantly splitting your group into 2 parties, and that's nice because it gives time to develop narratively for each individual character. But switching junctions on your party takes a ton of time, and it's not even worth it because the characters don't develop at all. There's nothing that happens in these split party segments where the characters develop or change or have any sort of new interactions. The entire cast is extremely one note, and they lack any real depth besides maybe Squall. They're more like caricatures than people. You know next to nothing about them for the entire run of the game. The information you got from them from their introduction is pretty much what you will know about them when the credits roll. There's nothing additional. It feels like they're trying to be quirky and funny, but there's no chemistry between these characters whatsoever, so it just comes off as annoying. The cowboy sniper Irvine shows up near the end of Disc 1, and by the end there, he has next to no character besides the sniper guy womanizer character, and then he has the terrible, terrible backstory reveal where all the characters grew up in the same orphanage, but they all forgot because they just did because of junctions. And Irvine doesn't change at all. It actually doesn't change anything. He's still the same character and is just there. Multiple points throughout the story have the party randomly just passing out and viewing scenes from the past through the eyes of some soldiers led by a guy named Laguna. This could be a pretty cool piece of storytelling. However, anything to do with Laguna is really stupid and it's annoying. It's supposed to be kind of cheeky and funny while also giving you a little hints about the main plot and everything, but it's never funny and it's never that interesting. and it doesn't really develop the plot at all. Laguna's friends, Kairos and Ward, are actually irrelevant. They don't serve any purpose to this game besides giving Laguna party members. Squall's party, when they wake up from these moments, just kind of completely ignore the flashbacks multiple times, and nothing changes. They just push it in the back of their minds, not acting like them all having the same dream at the same time and they witness the same events is like a big deal. Like, that doesn't matter to them. They don't care. And honestly, I don't blame them for not caring, because none of the Laguna segments actually matter in this story. You can take them out and almost nothing is significantly changed. You get a little bit of information about the girl from the beginning cutscene, but you can take that out and nothing changes. You can find that in some other spot. The rival character Cypher is just terrible. He's not interesting at all. He hates Squall for some reason. Like, they grew up in the same orphanage, just like everybody else for some reason. And he's like a bully, but you don't know why, he just is. He barely shows up in the game, and every single fight you have with him is pitifully easy, despite him narratively being like, I'm so much better than you, and Squall and the rest of them are like, oh no, it's Cypher, he's so tough. But the game doesn't show that in gameplay. Every single character from this game, especially Cypher and his crew, Fujin and Raijin, are way more entertaining in Kingdom Hearts, because at least in Kingdom Hearts, it's really funny how stupid they are. In this game, they're just kind of stupid and nothing else.
Yeah, you're the only ones who would take it, you know?
That was undeniable proof that we totally owned you, lamers. Good afternoon, slackers. What are you doing out here?
What do you care?
I don't. Tell me anyway. Now you're talking. Destined. In that case, let's be friends. I don't feel like cooperating with Destiny.
When have you ever cooperated with anything?
So many things just happen in the story in this game, and you as the player are just supposed to sit there and accept it. And like I said earlier, individually, I may be able to overlook some of these issues, but the sheer volume here makes it extremely hard to forgive. Maybe they'll bring it back with a strong villain who can help carry the narrative, though. Final Fantasy has historically had some pretty cool villains, and Sephiroth from the previous game is one of my favorite antagonists in a game, period. So I'll hold out for that. Okay, I'm done holding out because Ultimecia is one of the dumbest and worst villains ever. She's a witch from the future who uses her powers to possess a witch from the past to give herself time travel powers in the future, but not full time travel powers because she needs to possess a different witch who has better time travel powers for something, and for some reason she can't possess that witch to begin with. I don't know why. It's just, that's kind of the way it is. Her main goal is to compress time in on itself because she just wants to do that for some reason. She's evil. I don't know what it even means. She just says she wants to do it. What that actually entails other than like killing everybody, I don't know. I don't know what that's going to do to her, but you know, the game just tells you that's what she's going to do, so you just have to sit there and accept it. The worst part is she doesn't even get mentioned until Disc 3 of the game, and it doesn't even really matter because the vast majority of the game has nothing to do with her or her stupid time plot to begin with. The only time you actually see Ultimecia is during the final boss. Early on in the game, when the main villain was just the matron who was being possessed by Ultimecia, the writing had the opportunity to do some pretty interesting stuff, as Squall and his team had to fight against their former foster home mother from the orphanage they grew up in, and completely forgot about because junctioning makes you forget important stuff to that level. It uses this plot for a little bit, but then the witch leaves Adea's body, and you learn absolutely nothing about Ultimecia as a character after. She's just kind of there as an obstacle to fight. You don't know anything about her motives at all. I don't need my villains to always have some morally gray motives or be some sort of super deep introspective thought piece all the time. As you've seen with the previous games, I enjoy simple, even silly villains. I just want them to make sense in the context of their story, and Ultimisia doesn't do this, ever. There isn't a single moment in this game where I felt any motivation to want to beat her, because she's simply there just to be there. I really just don't like Final Fantasy VIII. It's a really tedious slog for me to get through, and sure, there are some things that I can speak positively about. Like I said earlier, the military academy setting is cool and offers a pretty unique perspective to tell the story from, and the FMVs are massively improved from FF7's, expanding the cinematic nature of these games even further. However, the vast majority of what this game has to offer frustrates me to no end. I can respect the attempt at making a brand new, never-been-done-before battle system, but it just falls flat in every way, and the writing does nothing to pick up the slack. I played this game twice for this video, and I genuinely tried to enjoy it each time. Maybe there was something I was missing, something I just didn't get about the game on the first time, so on my second playthrough I tried to really pay attention and really dive in, but it just never clicked. It was rough finishing this game, and honestly, I'll never play it again if I can help it. My journey through the Final Fantasy series had hit an all-time low here, and I was unsure if I even wanted to continue going through the entire franchise. Luckily, what came next would give me the second wind I needed to keep going with the second half of the series.